tables here. But tonight we're going to be specifically hanging out in chapter 5, and we're going to be looking at verses 16 through 25. We're going to be kind of bouncing around in there. As you're turning to Galatians with me, let me give you a little bit of a background about this book. The book of Galatians is Paul's letter, the Apostle Paul's letter to the churches in Galatia. Now, the Galatians are Gentile people, so they are not Jewish, of Jewish descent. They're just like us. They are those who God's decided to have the gospel preached to and to bring into his own fold. So they are Gentile people, not of Jewish descent. And the churches that Paul is writing to here in the book of Galatians are there as a direct result of his work of spreading the gospel on one of his missionary journeys. He traveled throughout the country proclaiming the gospel, and these churches in Galatia are a direct result of those. But since his time of going to Galatia and preaching the gospel, the Galatian people have fallen into believing a false doctrine. Somebody else had come in and started to preach a false gospel, preach another gospel. And so we see this book of Galatians as Paul's letter to them, trying to correct them, to bring them back to say, hey guys, what you're doing isn't right. Now we could spend an entire message going over these false beliefs that the Galatians had fallen into and the downfalls of these false beliefs. But tonight, I want us to, along with the Galatians, to be reminded, just as Paul reminded them, and is now reminding us, that in Galatians 5, 16 and 25, the true meaning of the gospel and its freeing power. Now, in tonight's passage of Scripture, we're going to see a couple different stages that the Galatian people walked through in life. In this first stage of life that we're going to look at is life prior to the law. Now, each one of us, no matter where we're at tonight, is going to fall into one of these three categories that we're going to talk about. So I want you guys to kind of pay attention and listen tonight. Where do you find yourself? Where in your walk today do you find yourself? Do you find yourself in any of these different stages in life that we're going to talk about? And this first one we're talking about is life prior to the law. Now, prior to Paul's coming to Galatia and preaching the gospel, this is exactly where the Galatian people found themselves. They were living life according to themselves. They were doing what they saw fit. They were living life in their pleasing their own desires. We might also call this a living according to the flesh. Now, when we live in this life, in this stage of life, prior to the law, we find ourselves stumbling around blindly, getting tangled up in all of the things that are there that tend to entangle and snare us. And we can see some of these things in Galatians 5, 19 and 21 in our passage tonight. Let's read that. This is the life according to the flesh, or what life looks like prior to the law. This is the life that we live. Prior to the law. It says, now the works of the flesh are evident. It goes on a whole list here of all the different things of what life prior to the law, what life even with the law can look like, but what life according to the flesh looks like. And these are the things. It includes sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalry, dissensions, division, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like those I warn you of. As I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So here we see an entire list of the things that we do to gratify the flesh, the things that are of our fleshly nature, these things that we find ourselves struggling with prior to the law. And when we're living life in this way, we're going through life, and I'm going to try and demonstrate this a little bit with my rope here tonight. This is a trick rope. I try to use something to get our ideas, our minds wrapped around these ideas that we're trying to convey. And tonight I'm going to use the trick rope. So when we go through life, I'm just going to get a flat spin going here. We go through life, it's like we're trying to get inside this circle here, to get inside of it, to get into the place that we're supposed to be, right? But when we live life prior to the law, or when we live life according to the flesh, it's like we're going around with a blinder on our eyes, and we're trying to get into that circle. And all that ever happens is we get tangled up and snared. We can never go very far because we just keep getting tangled up. And so that's where the law comes in. We see Paul telling, the law came back in the day of Moses. The law came specifically to the Jewish people, not to the Gentile people like the Galatians. But the law still applies to one and every one. This law comes in and it makes us see, makes us aware of our depravity, makes us aware of our stumbling, of our getting tangled up, because it shows us this standard that we're to be living by. It makes us realize that there are things in our life that need to change to live according to the law, which is where we get to our next section here, our next portion of life that we can find ourselves in, and this is life under the law. And this is where the Galatian people found themselves after Paul's departure. So Paul came in and he spoke the gospel, or he preached the gospel. He made them aware of their depravity, their need for God, and then he went on his way. He didn't fail them in any way. He definitely set them up for success, but then these other teachers came in and began to teach a new gospel that was life under the law, trying to, as the Jewish people do even today, to stand right before God by following the set guidelines, these set rules to try and to be in right standing before God. And so they fell into this belief that living life right, by following these rules, they would be in right standing before God. But with this life under the law, it's much the same as when we go through life blindfolded, except now we're not blindfolded. So we, if we're going and we're trying to get inside that circle now, we're aware of the circle, right? We're aware of where we're trying to get. We're aware now. We don't have the blinders on. We're aware of we're trying to get into that circle. But there's something missing. We still can't, we might be, we're aware that we're trying to get in there, but the blinders are gone, but we still can't make it in there. Our eyes may be open to see what we are getting tangled up in, but we still seem to fall into that. So Paul tells us here in our passage how to no longer get tangled up, how to move on, how to get past this. This is the key to success here, to no longer be tangled up by these things that we just listed, all these things in the verses that we read, all these works of the flesh. So Paul tells us how to avoid that. We're going to jump back up to verse 16, excuse me. Galatians 5:16 says, Paul is saying, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." So we've seen that this walking by the flesh, that because of the law, we see that walking by the flesh is not correct. We see that living in sexual immorality, jealousy, rivalries, envy, drunkenness, and the like, that is not the way to live. We see that under the law. But how are we supposed to live correctly then? And Paul says here, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." He goes on to say, "For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit." So here again we see that battle, that struggle that we find ourselves in of we know this is wrong. We know that these things that keep tangling us up are hindering us from getting inside, from getting in there and getting the life that God has placed before us. So we have this struggle. They struggle against each other. They're opposed from each other. And they keep you from doing the things that you want to do. It goes on in verse 18 to say, "But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law." So when we are led by the Spirit, we no longer have this law hanging over us saying, this is how to live. Yes, we are to live under the law, but the law is not the final word. So Paul tells us how to not get tangled up, how to not end up getting in that circle and then realizing we're just tangled up in ourselves again. And it's by living by the Spirit. So that's our final point that we're going to look at tonight, is living with the Spirit. So how then do we live within the Spirit? How do we live by the Spirit? Well, Paul gives us a really good start on how to live that in our next verses. Let's read verses 22 through 24. So we're going to jump down a little bit again. It says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love. So we saw what the fruits of the flesh were earlier, right? We saw the fruits of what living life according to ourselves, living life in the law, living life by our flesh is like. Now Paul is telling us what life inside the Spirit, what life inside that circle. When I draw this circle out with the trick rope, we get that flat spin. Now he's going to tell us what life looks like when we're inside that circle. And he says it right here. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And against such thing there is no law. So we saw, right? We saw this list of things that was hindering us, that was getting us tangled up from getting inside. And now we see this list of what it's like inside there. And they're total opposites, just as Paul told us. They're total opposites of each other. But this is what the life according to the Spirit looks like. It's goodness, faithfulness, love, joy, peace, self-control. Above such things against such thing there is no law. So now, the last verse that we're going to read tonight is the last verse in our passage tonight, which is Galatians 5:25. And it simply says, for if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. And this is the point I want us to really grasp tonight. That if we are living according to the Spirit, we won't get tangled up. Because if we keep in step with the Spirit, we are able to enter. Oh, I messed up! We'll try that again. We'll try that one more time. If I don't get it, then you guys missed the show, I guess. I got my timing off. So see, even still, I got tangled up, right? But I still have a second chance. I'm able to, if we live in step with the Spirit, slow this down a little bit, I'm able to enter into that, what that relationship is supposed to look like. Enter into that living under the Spirit, right? Because I'm keeping in step with the Spirit. Because of wow, I did it again. I'm just going to give up while I'm ahead. But that's what our life according to the Spirit looks like, all right? Is walking in step with the Spirit. So tonight I want to challenge you guys, challenge myself as well. Take this week to look at your life. Look at all the different areas of your life and think, where in this lineup do I stand? In all the different areas. Because we can be in multiple different portions of our life, can be in different steps, different portions of this. You know, our relationships with one another can be in life with the Spirit, but our relationships with our spouse could be in life of the flesh. Our lust could be in life of the flesh, but our scriptural reading is in life with the Spirit. We can be in all different parts of life, but as we go through this week, I really want us to take the time this week to look at all these different areas of our life and just see, where are we? Are we in life under the law? Are we in life before the law? Or are we in step with the Spirit? Are we willing to step forward, to live one step at a time in step with the Spirit? Let's pray. All right, thank you for this evening, for, again, the chance to just come together and dig into your word with our fellow believers. I thank you for the rain that you've given us the last few days. And I thank you that you are with us each and every step of the way, that we can walk with you no matter where we find ourselves today, whether we find ourselves prior to the law or living under the law, or even when we find ourselves living in the Spirit, Lord, all the steps of the way, you are there with us, taking each step with us. And when we are walking in the Spirit with you, walking step by step, it is a beautiful place to be. I thank you for that. Pray all this in your holy and precious name. Amen.